good evening and good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Artemi Izmestiev. I'm a policy specialist from the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, and I will be moderating today's Korea launch of the Human Development Report 2020. We had about 220 registered participants for this event, including a number of colleagues, but also many government representatives, representatives from the private sector, as well as members of the civil society, academia, and students. Thank you very much. It's really great to see you participating in this event, and I can see you right now signing in. Now, without further ado, let me invite Mr. Stefan Klingebel, Director of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, to say a few words to welcome all the participants. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you, Artemi. Professor Kim, Dean of the Graduate School of International Studies at Korea University, Director General Cho from the Development Cooperation Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, Excellencies from embassies in the Republic of Korea, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, and dear Pedro Conceição, lead author of the Human Development Report 2020 and Director of the Human Development Report Office. Welcome to the Korea launch of UNDP's 30th Human Development Report. This is the second time I'm delivering the opening remarks for the launch of the HDR, Human Development Report in Korea, as the director of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. The first time was on February 3rd last year, about 2 weeks after Korea recorded its first confirmed case of what was back then a mysterious respiratory disease. For last year's event, we gathered at the Hotel President in Seoul, and out of precaution, we issued masks and hand sanitizer. The number of cases at the time of the event was in the low tens, and I do remember that I was somewhat worried, but assumed that everything would be under control in a few weeks' time. The past 12 months have proven my assumptions, and I guess the assumptions of many others, wrong. While luckily, South Korea has been among the countries which were able to keep the pandemic under control, a look around the world shows how destructive the virus has been. Almost 2 million people have died, hundreds of millions of people have lost their jobs, years of progress in development have been erased. The Human Development Report speaks of COVID-19 as a cautionary tale, illustrating the consequences of human-centric development that disregards nature. Reflecting on reports on climate change and environmental degradation over the last 30 to 40 years, I cannot help but think that nature has been producing cautionary tales for us for quite some time. And for quite some time, our reactions to those warning signs have been similar to my reaction last year on hearing about COVID-19. Somewhat worried, but believing that everything would be under control. This year's Human Development Report makes it clear that we have good reason to worry and that it is high time to break out our inaction. With humanity now being the driving force behind planetary changes, the report points out that we have the choice to either embark on bold new paths or to be swept away, ill-equipped and rudderless into a dangerous unknown. Once again, proving why it is one of the most important think pieces on development, this year's report not only helps us reimagining the meaning of human development itself, but also shows us what these bold new paths in this new age of the Anthropocene might be. Before I conclude my introduction, let me just mention one thing. The HDR is a very special analytical flagship product. As a young PhD student, I was following the debates around the first and the second edition very closely. At that time, it was already clear that the concept of human development and its Human Development Index was a big splash. It was a challenge to many development debates and measurements. The HDR was able to change the development discourse. We all know that the concept of development and the development discourse have changed fundamentally. It is not easy to bring real change to our developmental thinking. And it is still true that our narratives and concepts will only change if we are able to come up with new measurements, new ways to organize data, and new ways to rank countries. Reading the HDR 2020 is a great response to this academic and real-world challenge. This is why I really wish to congratulate everybody who contributed to this profound report. With this being said, I want to thank the HDR office team and the lead author of the report, Pedro Conceição, who will present here today, for their hard work. Let me also mention that we as a policy center are very proud about the fact that we hosted the very first brainstorming workshop on the HDR 2020 here in Seoul. This was our very last real physical meeting in early February 2020, just the day after the launch of the previous HDR. I wish also to thank Korea University and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for co-hosting this event with us. I would further like to express my gratitude to the panelists, Dr. Yu, Chair of the Board of Directors at the Climate Change Center, Her Excellency Abida Islam, Ambassador of the People's Republic of Bangladesh to the Republic of Korea, Dr. Frank Reisberman, Director General at the Global Green Growth Institute, Professor Son from the Division of Environmental Science and Ecological Engineering at Korea University, and Ms. Kim, co-president at the Green Environment Youth Korea. We highly appreciate your making time from your busy schedule to speak here today. I wish all of us an insightful and exciting event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And now let me give the floor to Dean Kim from the Korea University Graduate School of International Studies. Korea University is the host of our office. So Dean Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Director General Stefan Klinkerbell of UNDP Seoul Policy Center, and the Director General Jo Young-mo at ROK Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Director Pedro Conceição of UNDP HDR office, ambassadors, distinguished panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored and pleased to welcome all of you to this Korea launch and panel discussion of UNDP Human Development Report 2020. On behalf of GSIS Korea University, I express sincere and warm welcome and congratulate the 30th anniversary of the Global Human Development Report. As you know, the Human Development Report, HDR, is an annual report published by the UNDP. HDR has an extensive, if you agree, influence on the development debate worldwide. I'm pretty sure about it. I myself had an opportunity to deliver welcoming remarks at the Korea launch of HDR 2016 and 2019. I still vividly remember that one of the most insightful parts of the HDR 2019 was Chapter 6, which dealt with the relationship between technology and human development. It was looking at technology's potential for divergence and convergence in the midst of structural transformation. It was looking at inequality dynamics in access to technology, and finds a convergence in basic capabilities, but divergence in enhanced capabilities. HDR 2020 has made another big progress. It deals with the relationship between human beings and the planet by emphasizing people's agency and empowerment can bring about the action we need if we are to live in balance with the planet in a fairer world. It shows that we are facing an unprecedented moment in history in which human activity has become a dominant force shaping the planet. COVID-19, which has become a global pandemic, has come to us as the greatest threat to human security, if I may. It has exposed overlapping inequalities and weaknesses in social, economic, and political systems, and threatens reversals in human development. As the report has correctly noted, other layered crises from climate change to rising inequalities continue to take the toll. In this vein, I fully agree with the key message of the report, saying that nothing short of a great transformation in how we live, how to work, and how to cooperate with each other is needed to change the path we are on. We need to explore the ways of making the transformation possible. We should prevent the vicious circle between planetary pressure and a societal imbalance from being repeated and getting worsened. I hope we can see the end of the tunnel in this crisis of the pandemic, but the post-COVID world is not going to be the same as before. We need to think of the new normal towards the constructive direction of striking a balance between people and the planet. HDR 2020 in this vein is guiding us to the path we will have to take. We must choose to strike out on bold new path, striving to continue human development while easing planetary pressures. As the report argues, the next frontier for human development will require working with, not against nature, while transforming social norms, values, and governance and financial incentives. Using this opportunity, finally, I'd like to thank UNDP Seoul Policy Center for maintaining the excellent relationship with GSIS Korea University. Again, I congratulate the Korea launch of UNDP Human Development Report 2020, and I sincerely welcome panelists and participants for this event. I hope today's event discussions will be highly productive. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Kim. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Cho Young-moo, Director General for Development Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. Director General Cho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of Human Development Report 2020 in Korea. On behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, I'd like to express my appreciation to the UNDP Human Development Report Office, the Seoul Policy Center, and Korea University for co-organizing this event. The partnership between Korea and UNDP has been strengthened over time. UNDP supported Korea for more than 40 years before closing its country office when Korea joined the OECD Development Assistance Committee in 2010. Last year, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of Korea's DAC membership and reaffirmed our commitment to continuing our role as a reliable development partner. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been supporting the UNDP Seoul Policy Center since 2011, to share Korea's development experience with other countries through UNDP's broad network. We are also supporting the Human Development Report Office, as we believe that development research findings and data provided by the reports are useful for effective development cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, today's launch is particularly special as 2020 marked the 30th anniversary of the concept of human development. Over the years, the Human Development Report has opened up new perspectives on how we measure human development. The report has shown that development is more than economic growth, and development processes are far more complex, requiring holistic and collaborative approaches across societies and countries. In this context, the Human Development Report 2020, the New Frontier, Human Development, and the Anthropocene touches upon a very important and timely theme, relationship between people and planet. We are currently faced with the challenge of advancing human development while easing planetary pressures such as climate change. Therefore, the report proposes a new planetary pressures adjusted human development index by taking into account each country's CO2 emissions and its material footprint. We are experiencing more and more extreme weather events, and our vulnerability to climate change and ecological threats has increased. The far-reaching impact of climate change calls for solidarity and global cooperation to implement existing pledges, including the Paris Agreement, and ensure a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. As mentioned in the 2020 report, the Korean government announced the Green New Deal last year, presenting its vision for achieving a carbon neutral society by 2050. We are making a strong push for this vision by shifting to renewable energy, creating a low carbon industry ecosystem, and investing in innovative green technologies. At the same time, Korea has been joining the international community's efforts to foster the global partnership for climate action. This year, Korea will host the second P4G summit here in Seoul. The summit will serve as a great opportunity to show the international community's commitment for a green recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, we are less than 10 years away from the deadline set by the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Korea is fully committed to working closely with our partners to achieve the SDGs at home and abroad by tackling the challenges described in the Human Development Report. In closing, I'd like to thank all the participants joining this event and wish you a fruitful discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General Cho. And with this, we would like to show a short video clip about one of the key terms in this year's report, the Anthropocene. So please roll the clip.
Anthropocene.
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 Anthropocene. Giorgio, help me.
Do I have to pronounce it correctly?
Some of you say something medical.
Something to do with old.
I think that's to do with climate change.
So something to do with people?
Anthro means man, right? Or human man?
I don't know the meaning of that word.
Oh, the Anthropocene. Yes, I know what that word means. Can I get a hint?
The current geological age, viewed as the
Period during which human activity has been dominant influence on climate and environment.
I think it means that the environment and it's been damaged.
Oh, we're in the Anthropocene.
current geological age. I should have known that.
Man, that's such a good word for right now, dude.
All right, so if you have been wondering until now what is Anthropocene, so it means that you are not alone. And with this, I would like to welcome Dr. Pedro Conceição. Dr. Conceição is the director of the Human Development Report Office in UNDP headquarters and the lead author of the report. He's connected to us from New York, and we are really glad to have him for the presentation. Pedro, the floor is yours.
Artemi, thank you. Director General Shaw, Dean Kim, Stefan, Excellencies, colleagues, friends. As Stefan mentioned, less than a year ago, the journey of producing the 2020 Human Development Report started in Seoul, where I would very much have liked to join you in person today. But the beginning of that journey turned into something very different from what all of us envisioned at the time. And it's a journey that is still ongoing in a way, because it's characterized by times that are very disorienting, not only with the pandemic, but climate change, a number of development trends that are going into the reverse. So I would like to emphasize that the central message of the report, the 2020 Human Development Report, is that it invites us to look at all of these challenges less as separate individual problems and more as reflections of this unprecedented moment in our history and the history of our planet that the video that we just saw alluded to. This is a moment where human pressures on the planet are driving dangerous planetary change. And the scientists, in fact, are arguing that we are entering a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, again, the focus of the video that we just saw. And what this implies is that we are confronting an unprecedented set of risks that are of our own making and that are harming us, people, but also all life on the planet. And once again, both COVID-19 and climate change are illustrations of shocks that result from the materialization of this new generation of risks. Now, this is the central message of the report, but I would like to briefly elaborate on three key points. First, the challenge. Second, the goal. And finally, third, the way forward, which is perhaps the most important. Now, first, to start with the challenge is that we are not only facing new types of risks, but that they are superimposed on a world that has large and often growing inequalities. And these inequalities are actually often exacerbated by these very risks. So an example is COVID-19. We know that the economic impact, for instance, has been much worse for women than men. In part because women are overrepresented in some of the economic sectors that have been more affected by the economic shock associated with the pandemic, but also because social norms related to the expectations about the role of women in homework reasserted themselves. So as a result, many women pulled back from the labor force, with drops of as much as 10 percentage points in the labor force participation rate of women, which represents a reversal in the progress that had taken decades to achieve. Now, the patterns broad more generally, if you take a look at these numbers, you see that countries that face more ecological threats linked to droughts, floods, or storms are also those where gender inequality is higher. And if we look at inequality in human development more broadly, the story is the same. Now, inequalities are also linked to dangerous planetary change, given that there are asymmetries in consumption and in power between those that over-extract and over-pollute and those that bear the consequences. Now, these numbers show that by the end of this century, the poorest countries in the world, those with the lowest levels of Human Development Index, and have contributed the least to climate change, could experience up to 100 days more of extreme temperature, while richer countries would actually experience 18 days less in terms of days per year of extreme temperature. Now, all of this is not inevitable. It depends on our choices. Now, because those 100 days, as these numbers show, could actually be cut by half if we were to be able to get closer to meeting the aspirations of the climate change agreement. So my second point is that if we frame these choices by bringing our embeddedness in nature forward to the core, the goal, which is the second point I would like to highlight, of advancing human development, which remains vital, needs to be supplemented by being mindful also of the pressures that we're putting on the planet that are generating these new risks. Because otherwise the very notion of human development for many today, and perhaps for everyone in the future, will be foreclosed. So if we compare the Human Development Index and planetary pressures, we see that at present, no country has reached this aspirational destination of high human development, which is represented here in horizontal axis, and low planetary pressures represented in the vertical axis. So the aspirational space is this green flashing triangle at the bottom right-hand corner of the figure. And the dots represent where every country is at the present. So we do know that some countries are moving in that direction, but none fast enough. So the goal, second point, is that it's important for all countries to move more quickly towards advancing human development, but at the same time to ease planetary pressures. Now, advancing human development is not only about people's well-being, it's about giving people conditions to make different choices. And this brings me to the last point on the way forward. The report lays out 3 mechanisms to enable and encourage people to make different choices. First, social norms. Like social norms associated with behaviors linked to the use of masks or smoking in shared space have changed very rapidly, we must now seek to establish social norms that give greater weight to easing planetary pressures. Already we know there is some evidence that during the pandemic, internet searches on recycling and reusing, for instance, went up. Second, incentives and regulation, which can be used to promote or deter action, shifting prices that shape choices of what people consume, what firms produce, where investors allocate their savings. And it's important not only to incorporate planetary pressures in prices, but also phasing out the subsidies that often are encouraging this very behavior. And low demand for energy and low prices, for instance, provide a favorable context to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, which is one of the examples of these harmful subsidies. And then finally, looking at nature less as a constraint, but actually as a potential collaborator, a partner in advancing human development by means that enable the protection and restoration of ecosystems as also advancing livelihoods and human development. One example includes the blue economy, for instance, how restoring and investing in oceans provides for livelihoods and economic opportunities for so many around the world. Now, standing in the way of making these choices are significant imbalances in power and choice. And I will close with an example of a striking data point that we have in the report. We show that the contribution of indigenous peoples on a per person basis to manage forests that help and work as a carbon sink is roughly equivalent to the carbon dioxide emissions per person of the top 1% of the global income distribution. And we know that these indigenous peoples are the very people that so often are marginalized around the world. Now, these inequalities are putting people and planet on a collision course. Our Secretary General of the United Nations last year, at the end of the year, made a very powerful speech in which she said that we are at a war with nature. People are at war with nature. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can make different choices, and our aspiration is that with this 2020 Human Development Report, we'll be able to help to signposts how to continue to advance human development while easing planetary pressures, moving us towards meeting the Sustainable Development Goals and the aspirations of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So let me conclude once again by thanking Stefan and the colleagues in USPC, which are very dear to me, all the colleagues in Seoul for inviting us to start the journey with you and giving us opportunity now to have this launch. And finally, the Republic of Korea, as Director General Cho, has been a very strong supporter of the Human Development Report Office. And without that support, we simply couldn't have done this report and last year's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for this excellent presentation. And if you allow me one additional question. This year's edition introduces a new experimental index, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index. And it takes the HDI and adjusts it accordingly to how much ecological pressure each nation is placing on the planet. So could you please elaborate on how this index actually influences the ranking of countries compared to the original Human Development Index?
Sure, Artemi. Very briefly, what the index is meant to do is to provide a concise and consolidated information related to the graph that I showed. So the idea is to encourage all of us to think not only about advancing human development, increasing the HDI, but to do it in a way in which we also use planetary pressures. So when we put the two together, we sort of discount the level of the Human Development Index, the higher the level of planetary pressures on a per capita basis that the country is putting. And the findings are that for countries with low and medium human development, measured by the Human Development Index, the impact is very small. So the adjustment is basically zero. But as we move to high and very high human development, that's why you see gaps opening up. This is important because it shows that countries with low and medium human development index are actually not contributing that much in terms of planetary pressure on a per capita basis. And the fact that the values open up show that it's actually possible to have relatively high levels of the Human Development Index while not putting that high pressures on the planet. So the change in rankings reflects this fact, the fact that some countries are actually able to achieve fairly high levels of the Human Development Index while being able to not put that much in terms of planetary pressures because they are not as reliant or don't consume as much on a per capita basis as other countries.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And now I would like to move to the panel that we have, and we have a very distinguished panel. I would like to turn to our first panelist, Dr. Frank Reisberman, Director General at the Global Green Growth Institute. Dr. Reisberman, you could begin and share the slides on the screen, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, pleasure to have a chance to comment a bit on the Human Development Report 2020. I've been a reader of many, if not most of those reports over the years, and participating in this panel gave me some extra motivation to dive deeper into this very interesting report. Of course, one of the things that struck me most in the report was the graph that shows the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on human development. This graph in the report shows that even the 2008-2009 financial crisis was a relatively small change in the overall human development of the planet. But COVID-19 has been an incredible shock to our overall system. And that indeed is well documented in this report, and of course has led to this reconsideration of the original Human Development Index. The Human Development Index has always been particularly focused on the social side of development, emphasizing three main elements. And here I'm quoting in the slide that you see now, that the Human Development Index was construed around three main capabilities, around health, education, and then still income, as an alternative, of course, to really income alone, GDP. But the conclusion, the sentence that struck me in this Human Development Index 2020, I quoted there, is that, roughly speaking, human development comprises capabilities that relate to well-being and agency. Improvements in human development as measured by the HDI, which accounts only partially for agency, were fueled by using resources that generated today's ecological crisis. Or in other words, really, the HDI didn't manage to capture these environmental issues that have now come upon us, if you like. And of course, that has led to the proposed planetary pressures adjusted HDI. And another sentence that struck me in the report was that it states, a reimagined human development journey thus calls on all countries to improve well-being equitably while easing pressures on the planet. And as other speakers have already indicated, the planetary pressures adjusted HDI accounts both for greenhouse gas emissions and material footprints, but it does so in a spirit that I think is quite typical for the Human Development Index, to do so on a per capita basis, which stresses the equality side of the index. And the question that was just there, then that I wondered and I looked up, the authors of the Human Development Report generally don't quote countries, but I think as an observer, I can note that indeed Korea's Human Development Index in 2019 was number 23. And if you adjust that for planetary pressures, then that drops by 19 positions to number 42. In fact, there is an 18% decrease in the Human Development Index. So Korea is an example of one of the countries that has high development and where planetary pressures are quite high. There are other countries where the adjustment is much smaller, as Pedro indicated in his response to the question just now. So the Human Development Index has always been a relatively, can I say, simple index. It deliberately took only a few dimensions. It wasn't a very complex composite index, but as the Human Development Index report shows, there is by now quite a range of other types of composite indices. And indeed, my own institute, the Green Growth Institute, has developed over the last number of years a so-called Green Growth Index that measures, in a way, very similarly, but with a much deeper integration of different elements of particularly environment and natural resources. The main 4 dimensions that comprise a total of 35 indicators are efficient and sustainable resource use, also social inclusion, natural capital protection, but then also what we call green economic opportunities. I'd just like to show you how you can present some of those, but of course we don't have time to go in depth. The picture of the Green Growth Index is quite similar to what the Planetary Adjusted Human Development Index shows us, but with more detail for different elements. Well, of course, the critical question that I was also asked to reflect on a bit in this panel is whether we can actually do something about this problems that the planetary pressures cause. Is there a way to grow, to meet the aspirations of developing countries where obviously economic growth is still a very high priority policy goal, in a way that reduces planetary pressures? So in a way, the key question is, can we decouple material use and pollution from growth? And in terms of my own institution, that would really be the question, is green growth feasible? Statement from the report, the HDI 2020 report says that the dominant view on decoupling is that green growth or green economy approaches hold promise by shifting towards more resource efficient and less emission intensive production and consumption, allowing for relative or absolute decoupling. Or in other words, the report concludes that the dominant view is that yes, decoupling is possible, but it also says, although slow growth contributed by reducing energy demand, absolute decoupling happened mainly as a result of targeted policies to promote renewable sources of energy and energy efficiency. Or in direct language, yes, it is possible to have green growth, but it requires targeted policies. We would call those green growth policies. And are countries doing this? Is there an opportunity to build back better? The question that we have heard many times in the last year. GDGI addressed this. We published a report where we compared the responses to the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, with the responses taken today. And we conclude that, in a way, all these stimulus packages that many countries invest in are a real opportunity to build back better. But in the last crisis, while there were some green elements to the stimulus packages of the US and China, by and large, the stimulus packages were brown. This time around, though, what has really changed is that indeed renewable energy has come of age. And renewable energy, as we conclude in a study of the NDCs, the commitments to the Paris Agreement by Mexico, Indonesia, and Rwanda, these NDCs, if delivered, will provide a very large number of green jobs. And that, I think, is the heart of the argument why there can be building back better. And indeed, that is what Korea has picked up on. Korea was one of the countries, as already was mentioned, to pledge a digital and green New Deal. In June, the president said that for the first time, and then followed that up by a commitment to go to net zero emissions in late October, another commitment by the president. And that has led to a very interesting set of measures for Korea, as announced, a Green New Deal that makes a big investment in very specific areas. But of course, the question is this also relevant for other countries? Is this relevant only for the European Union, possibly for the US if new President Biden gets his way, or for Korea? Or is this also relevant for low-income countries? So DGI has actually looked at that, and we've come up with a series of Green Deal policies that are relevant for all countries. And in fact, we've come up with what we call a model Green Deal for emerging and developing countries that would build back better, that will bring green jobs and deal with the restart of the economy, as well as accelerating climate action in a way that is equitable. The biggest difference we see between doing this for developing countries and what Korea or the EU have announced is that there is a much larger share of green jobs in natural capital, in restoration of carbon-rich habitats, forests, peatlands, mangroves, and in climate-smart agriculture, compared to the kind of measures that Korea has announced. But overall, I can say that the question I was asked, is there really an opportunity for countries to build back better? We see among our members that there are many countries that are trying to do that. We're supporting many of them. So we hope to see many more Green New Deals come out in 2021. We hope that the P4G summit that Korea will host will be a wonderful platform to discuss these approaches among all the participating countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank, for your very insightful comments. And among other things, for also reminding about the importance of measurement. Also, thanks for reminding about the importance of this adjustment and what it actually means for Korea. And this brings me to our next panelist, Dr. Yoo Young-suk. She had a very distinguished career, but right now she is the chair of the board of directors at the Climate Change Center. So, Dr. Yoo, the floor is yours.
Hello, I am Yoo Young-suk, chairman of the Climate Change Center. Today, I would like to take a moment to touch upon the UNDP 2020 Human Development Report based on its message for human development and Anthropocene, and the way forward to Korea and ensuring coexistence in our one and only home, the planet. For the past few decades, scientists have consistently warned of the harmful effects of human activities on the planet, which have taken place in the process of explosive economic growth since the Industrial Revolution. Humans have committed the destruction of our natural ecosystem. Also, a rise in greenhouse gases has escalated the threats to climate change and biodiversity. And as a result, we have come to destroy our only home with our own hands. Now, scientists and experts are sending clear signals about the dangers of human behaviors. The first signal is the emergence of a concept called Anthropocene. Anthropocene deals with mitigating humans' negative pressure on the Earth and ensuring sustainability of the planet. And in this new concept, human beings can no longer overlook or deny their impact on the planet. Another signal is something that I found very shocking in the report. It is about the COVID-19 pandemic. Our daily lives have changed completely since the outbreak of the pandemic, but this difficulty too has been caused by our own doing. Rapid urbanization and land use, changes in food supply, destruction of natural ecosystem, and climate change have led to the outbreak of zoonosis like COVID-19. These two signals are sending us a one consistent message that we have to make a choice that is completely different from those of the past. If we overlook the signal again and repeat the same choices, what will become of our future? Perhaps the year 2020, which is remembered as the worst year ever, might be recorded as yet a relatively good year for humanity that will remain. In fact, history tells us this truth. In the process of economic recovery that followed after global crises, we have increased pressure on the planet and made repeated choices that accelerated climate change. The Great Depression, the Second World War, the oil crisis, and the global financial crisis have all shown us that while GHG emissions dropped temporarily during these crises, the world saw a sharp rebound in emissions as economies recovered. The world is now confronted with the COVID-19 pandemic, economic recession, and climate crisis. Against this multidimensional crisis, the world should not repeat the past mistakes. For a sustainable future, we must choose a different vision from the past. That is, a transition to a low-carbon, eco-friendly society. Dr. Reisberman also said that the EU is taking the lead in this regard. By 2050, the EU aims to become the world's first carbon neutral continent under a new vision. Approximately 1 trillion euro has been set aside for financing the Green Deal, backed up by strong commitment. The same is true of the United States. President-elect Joe Biden has declared carbon neutrality by 2050 along with his Green New Deal. To that end, the incoming Biden administration is planning to invest some $2 trillion over the next 4 years. Now then, what about the Korean government? The Korean government, for its part, also declared a bold challenge. In July of last year, the government announced the Korean New Deal with a Digital New Deal and Green New Deal as its two pillars. And in December, this challenging vision of net zero by 2050 was presented in the long-term low greenhouse gas emission development or LEDS submitted to the UNFCCC. Carbon neutral 2050 is indeed a very challenging task for Korea. Korea has achieved a compressed economic growth at an unprecedented speed against the backdrop of population growth and energy-intensive, high-carbon industrial structure. And as a result, GHG emissions increased drastically as well. Given this reality, to ensure that the Korean government's declaration of carbon neutrality does not just end up as a mere rhetoric, what should we do? On the journey towards carbon neutrality, I believe that the most momentous task is to drive a transition towards a low carbon, eco-friendly energy structure in our industry. Making this transition will enable economic growth and GHG emissions to be decoupled, bringing about green growth as a result. However, industrial structure transformation cannot be achieved overnight. Mid to long-term meticulous planning and short to mid-term concrete action plans must go hand in hand. Over the short to mid-term, science and technology-based action plans are needed. Energy efficiency improvement, renewable energy diffusion, carbon capture storage, or reutilization, as well as forestry technology development must be scaled up extensively. Lastly, I would like to talk about an attitude that all of us must be wary of before I close my presentation. Every December, Kyosu newspaper selects the phrase of the year, which represents the zeitgeist at the time. Now, last month, professors who lead this newspaper outlet chose the phrase ashitabi, which refers to an attitude for thinking that I am right and you're wrong. This points to an attitude for not being able to accept the different views of others, only trying to push through one's own thoughts without communication, which fosters social conflicts and disrupts cooperation. Scientists, policymakers, business people, and members of civil society should all make philosophical reflections and efforts to maintain a sense of balance. Only then will we be able to stay unbiased in examining social phenomena and work together to achieve greater good for the sustainable future for all. Now is a time for showing greater respect, understanding, and solidarity for one another. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yu. This is very inspiring remarks. And even for those of us struggling with the Korean language, I think we need to learn this expression because I find it very useful and instrumental in the current context. With this, I would like to move to the next panelist. And I would like to introduce Her Excellency Abida Islam, Ambassador of the People's Republic of Bangladesh to the Republic of Korea. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Dear moderator, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As our previous panelists have mentioned that humans could achieve extraordinary socio-economic progress, especially the huge expansion of global economy in the past 50 years at the cost of nature, which is declining at an unprecedented rate in human history. The climate-induced calamities are directly affecting our lives and livelihoods, intensifying our vulnerabilities and our claims to a healthy environment. Moreover, this COVID-19 pandemic has destroyed the global economy and reversed many of our economic developments, as mentioned by our earlier panelists, at a time when planet is already suffering from climate change. I'm delighted to learn that the 30th anniversary edition of the HRD, for the first time ever, took into consideration the component of nature, that PHDI, and incorporated it to measure human progress and highlighted the vulnerabilities of both human being and the planet. It emphasized that the development should be pursued, ensuring the well-being of the both. And we welcome this attitude. I think we are moving towards the right direction to save the planet. And we can see the dramatic effect of PHDI in the Anthropocene epoch that on some countries ranking which have attained high position in HDI, but gone down in the ranking in terms of their respective HDI. In the 2020 HDI report, Bangladesh is placed among the medium human development category and ranked 133 out of 189 countries and territories. And according to the report, between 1990 and 2019, Bangladesh's HDI value increased by 60.4% from 0.394 to 0.632. And our GDI value has also actually more than some of our South Asian neighbors. We have also noticed progress in Bangladesh's in terms of life expectancy at birth, mean years of schooling, expected years of schooling, and GNI per capita. The report also shed light on inequality in the national share of emissions, where LCDs are suffering from the climate change impacts, despite having low carbon footprints. For example, Bangladesh, being a non-emitter country, has been constantly bearing the burden of the incessant carbon emissions of the developed countries. And it seems that when the poor are using the energy for their basic needs, the rich are consuming and emitting it more to support their lifestyle and investment. Unfortunately, due to climate change from now to 2050, Bangladesh will lose 2% of its annual GDP, and it will be around 9% in 2100. In spite of our excellent progress in resilience and adaptation, Bangladesh has 6 million climate migrants already, and the number could more than doubled by 2050 due to sea level rise. Already we have 19 million children in Bangladesh who are already under threat due to the adverse effect of climate change. And we believe that the strict implementation of Paris Agreement is the only way to slow down the current rate of damage caused by the climate change. I'll stop here, and if you have any further questions, I can, of course, add my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And Bangladesh indeed is an excellent example to discuss the Anthropocene and to discuss the current challenges. I would like to move to our next panel member and introduce to you the Professor Son. Professor Son teaches at the Division of Environmental Science and Ecological Engineering at the Korea University. Professor Son, the floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very meaningful seminar. I'm very honored to be here. I study ecology as well as environment studies. This year's Human Development Report has a lot of implications for us to think about. And I would also like to talk about the final objective or the goals that we would have to work towards to achieve. First of all, I'm going to take a moment to look at HDI, something that we've been using as an index for quite a long time, and also the newly introduced PHDI and the differences between the two different indices. And of course, the optimal goal here would be to achieve sustainability. But how to achieve sustainability? And I believe it is possible through ensuring resilience. Then how can we go about achieving resilience? For that, we have to utilize nature-based solutions. And more specifically, we need to apply an ecosystem-based management in order to increase resilience and also to realize the goal of sustainability. But above all, human beings towards the nature as well as the environment have to have a sense of stewardship. Otherwise, all of these methods or skills or techniques will be rendered meaningless. This photo that you're looking at is taken in Oral, which in Central Asia, where fishing has become no longer possible, and the whole environment area has become completely destroyed. Now let's go back to the HDI. Most of the aspects that are related to HDI are very much associated with socio-economic development. But starting from this year, we're taking a look at the environmental aspects, especially the CO2 emissions and the material footprint that comes as a result of the use of materials and resources around. And this is very meaningful that we're taking into consideration these two different aspects, especially from the point of the environmental studies and ecology. This is quite belated, but still it is quite fortunate that we're introducing this new concept by taking into consideration humans' impact on the planet. This is indeed a very meaningful endeavor. So, what is the definition of a nature-based solution? NBS can be summed up in the following three ways. First, looking at the current and future generations. In order to realize a sustainable human development, we have to work to protect our nature and to also ensure a responsible use of resources. For that, we need to have a sense of environmental stewardship. Second, to reduce the pressure or the impact that human development exerts on nature, we have to change or modify the development methods and pathways that have excluded nature in the process. Third, is that human society and nature are interdependent, and as such, society, economy, politics, culture, and environment, and all these elements must be encompassed in undertaking a systematic approach. That would be the gist of the MBS. As you may be very well aware, nature or society has the ability for resilience to go back to its original state. As we can see from the graph over here, we have the x-axis and the y-axis here, the ecosystem structure and function that shows the original status, original state of the nature. But of course, due to various factors, it may be undermined. But if there's that sense of resilience, it will be able to go back to its original state. But this resilience is not only related or limited to a natural phenomenon, it can be applicable to social as well as other areas. Only then, when the whole becomes resilient, we can really have a true sense of resilience in the world. Then how can we go about ensuring resilience in our society? As an ecologist myself, I want to take a look at the ecosystem-based management for ensuring resilience. Now, coming to the next term, ecosystem-based management or EBM. It is not only considering a single issue or problem or species or an ecosystem service in isolation or silo. It is going beyond those silos to look at all of those factors or full array of interactions within an ecosystem. It is about a holistic way of managing our society. So EBM or ecosystem-based management is about considering different diversity and productive ecosystems and the services they provide in our society. To be more specific, for example, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction or sustainable management of environment would be another representation of EBM. Let's say that, for example, we're trying to vegetate or plant new trees in a certain devastated area, or to do agroforestry. That would be one of the ways in which to ensure ecosystem-based management. That would be a good way for ensuring resilience across our society. And such resilience will go a long way towards ensuring sustainability, especially the sustainable human development envisioned by UNDP would be materialized. And that would also contribute to achieving the 2030 SDG and the Human Development Agenda. In summary, first we have to begin with stewardship, and our final end state or end goal would be to ensure sustainability, which is the sustainable human development. And along the way, we have to have a sense of resilience, which is about socioeconomic resilience and environmental resilience at the same time. And to get there, we need to have an ecosystem-based management approach. In the Aral, after water was lost, you've seen this land turning into a desert. The white thing that you see are the shells of the clams that were subsided at the bottom of the sea. So they have become a devastated land. But one way to restore this area is to, for example, to plant a very young tree. You go to this very far remote area and you go around to plant these trees for about 10 days. And then you will be able to see some rebirth of vegetation. And after a few years passes by, and you will be able to see a completely new type of ecosystem that will come into the scene. What we need and what we want in the end is to achieve resilience, restore the degraded functions so that we can make our nature more sustainable. In conclusion, the final message that I want to deliver to all of you is that our awareness has to be changed and we have to become stewards of our nature. We have to take concrete actions, especially based on nature-based solutions and through ecosystem-based management so that we can achieve sustainable human development in this planet. Thank you very much. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Son, for this excellent presentation. And the report indeed talks a lot about the nature-based solutions, sort of concrete solutions for the challenges. And of course, the example that you showed from the Aral Sea is really remarkable. I myself consider myself lucky having seen much more wide Aral Sea as a kid. Right now, it's no longer there. I would like to move on to the next speaker. And last but not least, we have Ms. Kim Ji-yeon. She's the co-president of the Green Environment Youth Korea.
As have been introduced, I am the co-president of GEYK, Green Environment Youth Korea. I would like to start with this quote. We are the first generation to experience the climate crisis and the last generation to stop it. This is a statement by President Obama. So in 2020, I think it's an unforgettable year for all of us, not only because of COVID-19, but because of wildfires and monsoons. We have had a set of extreme weather. And now climate change, as we now realize, is a part of our everyday lives and not just a far-off story. We also know that we were wrong to think that we could dominate and control nature. We now realize that we are connected to nature. HDI has included an experimental index of Phdi this time around, and I believe that it is great that such an appropriate value has been reflected. On the next slide, you will be able to see that due to COVID-19, we worked on overcoming this crisis, but you could see that climate change is the bigger wave to come. The next slide shows that sustainable society is a society where the current generation and future generations have equal opportunities with a wide variety of choices. But the youth, we can no longer dream freely about the future. Within COVID-19, we believe that the youth have been hit the hardest, and this is confirmed through various reports. COVID-19 can be overcome with vaccines, but climate change will become even more severe, and it is irreversible. That's what makes it so scary. I tried to come up with this slide. Climate change is impacting food, housing, education, labor, gender equality, art, and culture, as well as our well-being and national security and human rights. The youth, it's very difficult for us to become decision makers, and so we need to make personal changes, but personal changes cannot be fundamental changes. We always talk about our goals for 2050, but the older generations are making the decisions for 2050, and we are the ones who will be living 2050. That makes us feel helpless. We need to make sure that we take control of the solutions for our problems, and we need to remember that government decisions need to be supported by the public, and therefore the voice of the youth is more important than ever before, as we are the direct stakeholders. The next slide shows that we have come up with 2 ways to motivate the participation of the youth. First is using soft power, second is solidarity. Let's talk about soft power first. We are becoming more aware of climate change, and raising awareness is ever more important. But raising awareness should be done through soft power and make it fun for the youth to participate in raising awareness. Climate change is supported by scientific facts, but how can we use our approach to make it fun and cheerful for the youth? If you take a look at the next slide, you can take a look at some events that we had planned in the past. We had music festivals called Green Plugged In, and many youth participate in this festival, and so we set up game booths for these music festivals, or we also participate in film festivals in the form of talk concerts. And the next slide shows that we participate in publishing activities. Most recently, in November of 2020, we actually hosted an event called the Asia Climate Parade. So we had youth all over Asia participating on a parade in their own locations on the same day. So we had locations to draw our signs, to participate in parades. So here you can see that we gathered in the area of Hongdae, and we had bands that we invited. We sang together, we danced together, and we also talked about our goals. We had about 60 to 70 youth participate at this event, and the satisfaction of the participants was very high. This event was on a Saturday night, And so there were many citizens in that area at that time. So many people took pictures and many people participated in our parades. Second, I would like to talk about solidarity with youth overseas. Regardless of nationality, we need to become comrades to fight climate change. And so we have many projects to work with youth overseas. Climate change is a transnational issue. If we have oil leaks, then everybody thinks that the neighboring countries should find solutions together. But for climate change, it's a global issue and not just a local or regional issue. So we need to collaborate with youth from various countries to work together. For example, we worked with the 3 North Asian countries of China, Japan, and Korea because we realized that coal-fired power plants in Southeast Asia are being funded by the 3 Northeast Asian countries. And so we worked with the relevant countries so that the youth can take action against their government at the same time. The next slide shows the participation of the Indonesian participants. And we actually had a campaign titled, "That's Where the People Are." So despite researches on how coal-fired power plants are irrelevant in the future, Indonesia is still conducting relevant projects. And so we have witnesses and testimonies from Indonesia who will talk about the issues related to coal-fired power plants in their local areas. By having the solidarity and cooperation, we can motivate each other, and we can also take a look at how these issues play out in each local area. Next, let me talk to you about how to reflect the voice of the youth. And I have come up with 2 methods. As I continue to mention throughout my talk, we are the actual stakeholders of climate change. There's a window of only 7 years to stop the rapid increase in temperature on Earth. And so not only should we raise awareness, but we also need to come up with direct policies and systems. The decision makers, it seems that they don't have a sense of urgency and ownership like the youth, because we will be living the future. And so we should be able to voice our opinions in the decision-making process. For that, I have come up with 2 solutions. First is to come up with ways that the youth can participate in existing systems, and second is to come up with a new consultative body. For the first track, there are many committees in the government. For example, there is the LEDS that has been proposed to the UN. This includes energy and transportation subcommittees. And there's a youth subcommittee. It seems quite odd to have a youth subcommittee with other subcommittees such as transportation or energy, and the youth have not been included in the relevant mainstream subcommittees. So it seems that the reason why there's a youth subcommittee is to show that they are inviting the youth to participate, but actually the participation of the youth is not effective in this way. Some people say that the youth lack expertise, and so we cannot participate in the mainstream subcommittees, but we have a sense of genuinity and we are realistic compared to the experts such as professors. For example, even the lawmakers, they are not exactly domain experts, so I don't see any reason for to be excluded from these mainstream subcommittees. The second way to approach this is to have actually dedicated consultative bodies for the youth. We actually have a network called the Youth Policy Network. We need to maintain these channels and platforms for discussions. Up until now, we have been invited to participate in policy talks temporarily and ad hoc methods. This is a sort of youth washing, but we need to make sure that we have continuous opportunities to participate in policymaking for a sustainable society. In the decision-making process, what kind of changes do we need? Well, during the decision-making process, we need to make sure that people accept the opinions of the youth without bias. We should not be looked down as youth, or at the same time, we should not be given excessive compliments or special treatment, because that makes us feel like we don't belong. So I do have an example. Last year, the members of our organization participated in the Seoul Metropolitan City Green Growth Committee, and they said, you are passionate because of the youth, but we need to be more critical. Well, it seems that we are always looked at differently because we are young. Within the society, for the youth who raise their voices, sometimes we are given disadvantages and we are discriminated. That has to be prevented. The youth, we are the ones who will be facing climate change in our future. So we believe that climate change is not something that we can avoid, and therefore we need to take action. Although the reality may be very difficult, we need to continue to be interested in climate change to change our personal lives as well as the overall society system. I would like to end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kim, for this comment. In fact, it's important for us to remind ourselves that building back better, it's not only about talking the talk, it's about the individual actions as well. And you spelled out this very well, because it takes awareness, it takes solidarity, and it takes very active and meaningful participation by the young people in this process. So thank you very much for that. Now, with this, I would like to move to the discussion. First of all, let me start with a few questions for Pedro, because he is following the discussion from New York, where it's already late in the evening. And the first question is from Jonghyun Kim, and she's asking whether PHDI is going to replace the HDI as the main index of the report. Now, there is also a question from Sona O, and it's on how to make sure that reduction of planetary pressures in some countries does not come at the expense of the other countries. Pedro, over to you.
Thank you, Artemi. Before I address the very good questions, let me thank all the panelists for the very insightful comments. I can see that many of you have read the report. That is very gratifying and rewarding. And your comments were very useful. And I look forward to continuing the discussion and the collaboration with all of you. Now, will the PHDI replace the HDI? We, in the human development reports, have what we call a set of indices, a battery of indices, because it's very difficult to have one single index that measures and captures all the elements that are relevant. So, for instance, we have also the inequality adjusted human development index that discounts the level of human development by the level of inequality that exists in different countries in each of the components. So we could conceivably have an approach that is closer to what Frank's index does, which is to combine many different elements, which provide a more granular perspective. But in our view, that also there's a loss that comes with it, which is the loss in clarity in what the index is measuring and what it is conveying. So at the moment, our thinking, it may evolve, but our thinking is that we will continue to have a range of different indices. We have the Human Development Index, we have the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, now the Planetary Adjusted Human Development Index. We have a multi-dimensional poverty index, for instance. We have a number of gender-related indices. And it's important to look at each to provide guidance on the direction that we think should be encouraged with the PHDI, as I mentioned, to advance human development while easing planetary pressures. But the discussion on the PHDI is open-ended. We welcome feedback, and our aim is to improve it over time as we get more and more feedback. The second question on whether some of the reduction is at the expense of others. I think that could be an argument that could be made for the carbon emissions indicator that we use because it's production based. So conceivably, you could have a country that emits very little and it basically imports everything that is intensive in emissions from abroad. But our material footprint is consumption based. So that takes into account all the use of materials along the supply chain. So it's not possible to reduce the material footprint in the way we account for material footprint in the PHDI by sort of outsourcing material use to other countries. So we try to find a balance between having an indicator that is consumption-based, which is the material footprint, but it's also important to have something that speaks and provides incentives on the production side, we believe. So that's why we use the combination of these two indicators. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Now I would like to go to Frank and ask him about the prospects that we have in the future. Now, one of the participants is noting that the crisis in 2007-2008 led to the emergence of the green growth agenda worldwide. Would you expect something sort of a similar push emerging from the current multiple crises that the world is experiencing?
Thank you. This is a very interesting question. It's true that indeed, for some countries, green growth and also the green economy for the UN partnership on the green economy emerged out of the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009. But at that time, it was a very small part of the discourse. If you have an analysis of all the stimulus packages, for instance, you see that there was a nice green element to the very large package that President Obama introduced. The Chinese had strong support for a green element, but by and large, the brown stimulus, the brown discourse, if you like, dominated. That, I think, is probably the biggest change. If you now look at Korea's Green Deal package or that in the EU, for at least a significant number of countries, they realize that green has to dominate the overall investment for it to make a difference. Although, on the other hand, there are still many countries not convinced. From analysis of all the initial support for the economy right when the pandemic broke out, you saw that the large majority was still not recognizing green. So I think the emergence of green 10 years ago is leading to a much larger share in the green, in the overall discourse now. That's probably the biggest change, of course, because renewable energy at the time was still something that needed to be subsidized. And by now, I've been also in the IRENA assembly meetings the last few days, for instance. Everybody recognizes there's actually enough money to be found if you want to have a renewable energy investment. It's a shortage of projects that is the current barrier. And the total investments of about $800 billion a year in renewable energy seem large, but IRENA says to get to sustainability, you would have to quadruple them to about 2 trillion. So that is, I think, at the heart of the change in discourse. Is it really central enough? Potentially the new element is represented by youth, I would say. As our last speaker was very eloquent, I was very impressed by the school strike for climate last year, all the engagement of the youth in the debate. It might still not be as central as Ms. Kim would like to see it, but I think that is in a way the new element in the discourse. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Frank. And I find the work done by the GGGI on which elements of the Green New Deal can apply to the developing countries extremely relevant in this context. And of course, thank you for the reminder about the role of the youth. One of our colleagues also took part in the school strike together with her children. So this is indeed a very important work done by the youth. I would like to move to Dr. Yu. I would like to add one question to discuss the current plans of the Republic of Korea. For example, it announced about the plan to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050. And of course, it will have a number of sort of big obstacles on its way. So what do you think would be the main obstacles for achieving the goals of sustainable society? And in what areas do you think there should be the biggest change? So Dr. Yu, over to you.
I think the most important element is to make a transition to low carbon industrial structure. And in order to bring about that transition, there has to be massive fiscal support on the part of the government and also policy support, a multifaceted manner. And in this massive transformation, we have to make sure to deal with social conflicts. We need to first build a social consensus towards carbon neutrality. Above all, there has to be transparent disclosure of information and also increasing awareness about the need to promote carbon neutrality. The person currently involved in civil society, I'm very much involved in various activities to increase public awareness, especially communicating with the business people, as well as the government organizations and quasi-government officials and opinion leaders, and also the youth groups. We try to provide a lot of education and training opportunities for them. We have a climate change annual academy programs that we operate at our institute, which is all about raising awareness and also building social consensus towards a grand goal. Once we have a consensus between stakeholders as well as the general public, we will be accelerate the transition towards carbon neutrality across society.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yu. Now, I would like to ask one question to Honorable Ambassador. Bangladesh is among the countries that are hardest hit by the climate change, and currently it also chairs the Climate Vulnerability Forum. As a chair of the forum, what steps Bangladesh would like to see taken by the global community to ensure that the Paris Agreement goals are met? And in addition to this, I would also like to state the question that Stefan asked to all the participants is basically how to incentivize the decision makers in favor of the longer term development thinking, because obviously climate change falls within such category. Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you, dear moderator, for your question. Actually, Bangladesh has assumed the presidency of CVF for the second term, and also the Vulnerable 20 Group of Minister of Finance from the Marshall Islands at a time when the world is suffering from climate change and the COVID-19.
Chat box.
Bangladesh will be the voice of the vulnerable countries and will promote their interest in the global platform, especially at the COP26 in Scotland and at the forthcoming Climate Adaptation Summit. Bangladesh is also proud to host the South Asian Regional Office of the Global Center of Adaptation in Dhaka to accelerate climate adaptation action and solution in South Asia. During the CVF presidency, Bangladesh prioritized generating support for the 1.5 degree campaign, accelerating financing mechanism, and highlighting the narratives of climate resilience, appointing UN Special Rapporteur on climate change, and the creation of CVF and V20 Joint Multi-Donor Fund to enhance climate resilience, etc. Bangladesh's focus is strong adoption measures and loss and damage, both in action and finance, and it will be important to continue to seek stronger commitments for action and support, including new and additional finance, capacity building, and technology support from the developed countries on both adaptation and loss and damage. As a CVF chair, with the suggestion and the consultation of CVF Troika countries, Bangladesh has already appointed 5 thematic ambassadors in the area of ambition, vulnerability, renewable energy, culture, and parliament. As the UK is the host of COP26, Bangladesh would like to work closely with the UK government. Vulnerable countries are now looking for some solidarity for the challenges they're facing due to climate change. The platform for COP26 could be used to secure a recovery support package for vulnerable nations, and Bangladesh would request a high-level presence from the UK at the CVF high-level meeting for 26. And the CVF countries under the leadership of our Prime Minister has already launched a high-level global platform campaign called Midnight Climate Survival, demanding national determined commitment at the NDC with enhanced pledges for reducing emissions to keep the global temperature below 1.5 degrees. Nearly 50 CVF countries have already pledged to rely on 100% on renewable energy by 2050, and they're developing long-term development plans in this regard. Bangladesh, to enhance our commitment to NDC and also to mark the birth centenary of our father of the nation, we are planning to plant 10 million trees. We have also decided to launch a program to develop a national Mujib climate prosperity plan to help plot and mobilize resources for the implementation of a new pathway to secure our future. In a unique action, our parliament has adopted a parliamentary motion declaring the planetary emergency to deal with the grave impacts of climate change. We are aiming at producing 30% of our total energy from renewable sources by 2041, in line with the CVF vision of using ultimately 100% renewable energy. And we're already an important member of Track 6, Resilience and Adaptation Track of UN, along with UK, Egypt, Malawi, Netherlands, and St. Lucia to achieve resilient people, environment, and economy. For a more fruitful cooperation between CVF and UK COP26 presidency, Bangladesh Prime Minister, along with Mr. Ban Ki-moon, has recently written a letter to the Honorable Prime Minister of the UK. And as President of the CVF Forum, it is our honor to continue to amplify at this COP26 and beyond the voices of CVF members, especially those affected by climate change. And I believe that as a CVF country, that we have to depend on the policies and decision of the developed countries who have more carbon dioxide emissions and natural footprints. Because if they pursue environment-friendly policies, that's the only way we can actually achieve a green planet and at the same time ensure the survival of human and the planet as well together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this. And indeed, Bangladesh is championing the climate change agenda, not only internationally, but also within its domestic policy. And I think that the interlinkage between the two is extremely important. Thank you also for the reminder of the importance of solidarity, South-South solidarity between the countries in the same situation, as well as solidarity by the countries that are at the different stages of development. Now, I would like to turn to Professor Son and discuss a little bit more in depth the issue of the nature-based solutions, because he, in his presentation, illustrated such solutions. Now, by the report, they are identified as very important mechanism, the main mechanism for tackling the climate change. Yet, there is also the acknowledgement of how they have been largely ignored by a lot of governments, the firms, the investors, and so on. So what do you think can be done to actually get attention to the nature-based solutions and scale up the funding towards them? Over to you, Professor Son.
네, 고맙습니다. 앞서서 유영숙 이사장님도 말씀하셨고 GGGI 소장님도 말씀하셨습니다만, 사회의 지속 가능성을 바라보는 관점과 관련된다면, 즉 이전에는 사회 경제적으로 발전을 하면 그것이 지속 가능성이라고 생각을 했습니다. 그러나 이 보고서에서도 의미하듯이 인간이 자연에 주는 영향이 결코 지속 가능성을 담보하지 못하게 하기 때문에 HDI로 현재 제시되고 있는 인간이 자연에 미치는 영향을 고려해야 된다는 점에서 출발하는 것 같습니다. 다시 말씀드리면 자연에 대한 시각과 사회에 대한 시각의 균형이 가장 기본이다라는 생각입니다. 유영숙 이사장님의 말씀, 인식 전환이라고도 생각이 됩니다. 정책 결정자들은 이제 사회 경제적인 발전이 최종적으로 지속 가능성을 담보하지 못한다는 인식 하에서 자연을 고려한 발전 전략이 지속 가능성을 담보한다. 균형 잡힌 시각이 가장 기본이다. 이렇게 생각합니다. 그것은 인간이 자연에 대해서 가져야 할 기본적인 인식, 스튜어드십, 환경에 대한 책임의식, 환경에 대한 청지기적인 인식이 기반이 되지 않으면 지속적으로 사회 경제적인 발전이 지속 가능하게 할 것이다라는 잘못된 의사결정과 판단을 하게 된다라는 것입니다. 채팅창에 와 있는 질문 중에 한 가지는 대도국의 경우에 NBS 달성이 매우 여러 제한 조건 때문에 어려운데 그것을 어떻게 할 수 있느냐라는 것이었습니다. 잘 아시는 대로 선진국에서 개도국에 많은 지원 사업을 합니다. 그런 지원 사업의 경우에 단지 어느 한 측면에 개발을 목표로 하는 데서 벗어나서 자연을, 환경을 동시에 고려하고 사회 경제적인 발전을 염두에 둔 지원 전략을 수립하는 것이 개도국에 대한 부족한 점을 보충하는 방안이 될 수 있지 않나 그렇게 생각합니다. 이상입니다.
Thank you very much, Professor Son. And I would like to now address some questions to Ms. Kim. In the chat box, there is one question that is related to the fact that currently there is no problem with awareness. If we ask young people about different environmental issues, I'm sure that the responses that we will get would be quite solid. At the same time, there are a lot of things that prevent them from taking the right action. So for example, the consumption is still very much oriented towards the brown pattern. The other question that I would like to ask is about the challenges related to participation, to the meaningful participation of the young people, or to making sure that their voices are heard on important social issues. So in your opinion, what are the fundamental obstacles for the young people to participate actively in the climate change movements for social change, and so on? So Ms. Kim, over to you.
I think there's a gap between action and understanding. And so in the end, for climate change and for us to change, we need to understand that we have to make sure that we endure inconveniences. Changing action is always very difficult, and changing habits are very difficult. For example, if you say you're going to get up at 9 o'clock every day, then that may be difficult. So maybe you should just say you're going to get up at 9 o'clock early in the morning just 3 times a month or 3 times a week. But we need to understand that if we don't change, there are no other choices. For example, you may find it inconvenient to change now, but if you don't take action, it will boomerang back to you. So the youth sometimes think it's unfair. We did not create this earth. Why do we have to pay the consequences? But I think we have no choice at this point in time. Each generation went through their set of troubles. For example, older generations went through the process of democratization. Of course, we live in a more comfortable world, but we are faced with the climate crisis. So this is the issue for our generation. We need to understand that. So we need to change ourselves. But what about the companies that created climate change? What about the government? Well, if they were ignorant, then we could say, well, they didn't know better. But if you take a look at companies like Exxon, they knew for a very long time about climate change, but they actually spread the word against climate change. They wanted to make sure that they're not put in a position to compensate because of climate change. So that's why we have climate-related suits raised by the youth against companies and against governments. We need to recognize that this is the issue for us. We need to make our sacrifices, although there may be inconveniences. But what about the cost for these sacrifices? Well, the older generation, they knew about this. So maybe we need to ask for compensation from the older generations. The youth generation, What are our barriers in participation? Well, I believe, and my colleagues believe, that compared to the older generations, the youth, we are not stable in our social status and economic status. And as you have seen in the media, because of COVID-19, we see extreme polarization amongst the youth. And because of these socioeconomic instabilities, we sometimes don't have the room to think about the future and climate change because they are driven to dangerous jobs. They cannot afford a healthy meal. And so given this situation, sometimes we're not able to act. And so economic support for the youth is urgent. And I believe that's one of the necessary solutions.
Thank you very much. I think from your side, it sounds like a very important reality check for all of us, because of course we can talk about this this agenda, but it will take the young people to take it to the heart, and this is why what you are saying is an extremely important message. Thank you very much. I would like to now also discuss a little bit about what is next. And there is the proposal from Sandia Iyer from Tata Research Institute. She is asking, is it possible for us to work on the best practices that lay out the processes for adjustment of the planetary pressures? I would like to give the floor to Pedro to discuss this, as well as other plans related to what comes after the report.
Thank you, Artemi. Let me go back to this question that you raised, and Ji-yoon has already alluded to, which seems to be a paradox between the fact that people care about the environment, are aware of it, and in our report we document that in polling, it's very clear that 70, 80%, 90% of people often say we care about the climate, we care about the environment, but then there is a gap between that and action. And this in the literature is called the environmental paradox. And this gap between values, concerns, and action has often to do with the fact that people feel powerless to make changes that are meaningful on an individual basis. And they think that those around them don't care as much as they do. And so this leads to paralysis because people care, but then they think that others around them don't care as much, so they don't change their behavior, and that leads to a paralysis, really. So the gap between values and action can be bridged through social norms. Social norms, these rules of behavior, these shared patterns of behavior, is one element that can bridge these two elements. And it's applicable to many things. As I mentioned the example of masks, the use of masks, which cannot be possibly enforced. I mean, it can be a rule and the government can say this is what should be done, but it's ultimately about a social norm. People just do it because it's not acceptable for someone not to be seen without a mask. So that's why we have an old chapter in the report that looks at the importance of social norms and changing social norms. And this implies the importance of many actors. Individuals have a role to play. Civil society has a role to play. Obviously, governments have a very important role to play. But the message here on the way forward and on what to do is that there are many actors that can play a role and trigger changes in social norms that can bridge this gap between values and what people care about and action. I should emphasize that, as I mentioned, this is not alone enough. I think it's important to look at incentives, prices, and regulation. And it's important also to look at nature-based solutions, as Professor Son articulated so clearly. We call it nature-based human development. It's about this idea that human development and nature are not at odds with one another, but can actually seek synergies. So this is what we propose in terms of the way forward. I should say that also we explored the role of actors such as central banks, for instance, regulatories of financial capital markets. So there's a role of many actors that often do not seem as having a bearing on the changes that are required, that can be mobilized as we look forward towards triggering the changes that are needed.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for this, and thank you also very much for sticking with us until extremely late in New York. So thanks to you and to all the colleagues from other regions who are still following us. I would like to thank with this once again all the speakers and all the participants for your active participation. In spite of the constraints, we would prefer to see you in person, but we try to make the best of having you online. And we will be sharing the webinar recording via our website. We also look forward to continuing the discussion with you. We see today's discussion as the start. Please feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions and comments that you have. With this, thank you once again, and have a good day.